Welcome to VHF Contesting, magic bands with super results from average stations. So what's ahead for this presentation? First, I want to talk about the broader joys of contesting, my own contesting journey, particular VHF contesting, the ARRL and the CQ contests. Then we'll go into what are average stations that work in these contests, the small antennas, the propagation, some strategy and operating practices, and then an exhortation to get on the air. So who is this presenting today? It's Jim Wilson, K5ND. I'm a writer. I wrote with Heathkit Education. I've written for a number of the amateur radio publications. I'm also a blogger at k5nd.radio. I'm a 6-meter addict and a VHF contest rover. But before we get started, we have a warning for you. This is an obligatory warning that VHF contesting can be an absolute blast, but it can lead to some strange things. VHF contesting, at least for a rover, is about putting all the antennas that you own on top of your car and the equipment inside. This is the inside view with all my rigs and computer in the car ready for a rover weekend. Be warned, this could happen to you. Okay, we got the housekeeping out of the way. Let's check and see if anybody's hanging around for the rest of this presentation. Well, at least a few of you are. Well, I want to talk about the joys of contesting, also known as radio sport. First thing, there's more stations available on a contest weekend. There's just more activity. So that's a good reason to get on the air. For HF contesting, you can pick up DXCC in a weekend, and I'm not making that up. VUCC, the VHF UHF Century Club, you can do the same thing on a VHF contesting weekend. Then you also have competition in categories that fit your station and your operating practices. Plus, you can measure your improvement over time. Another thing that's kind of fun is you're basically resetting your VUCC to 0 and starting all over for the weekend. So it can be a good time, a good fun time to get into these contests. Regarding my own contesting journey, it's really a matter of continuous improvement and seeking out more fun and activities that fit your station at the time. For me, I started out with HF, CW, and RIDI contests. I can recall tuning across the 40-meter band and having it absolutely explode with signals. I started listening and figured out there was a whole bunch of DX there. I said, what is going on? Well, it was a contest, and everybody was on the air. Lots of stations, lots of countries, no pileups, very fast operation, and it captured me. So I started chasing DXCC, and then I started getting into the competition. My scores started being registered in the magazine. I go, gosh, how do I improve on that? I started looking at contest categories. What category fits my station? I actually looked at the QRP categories and even set some records for QRP RIDI single band entries. Then I started looking at VHF contests. The UCC was an attraction, the competition was attraction. There's some pretty cool categories, single operator 3-band that fit my station. Then I started looking at the rover categories. So that's how this started, and it goes back to the warning that happened earlier in this presentation. In the photograph on this slide, you can get a perspective on some of my rover operations. There's just a couple of antennas there. That mast that's holding them up is actually a painter pole that I picked up at the local hardware store. It was a matter of getting on the air and trying out rover and seeing what happens. It can be some fun stuff. So that was my journey, starting out in HF contesting and migrating to VHF contesting. So what is it about VHF contesting? First, they're smaller antennas. I mean, you're starting at 6 meters. The dipole is roughly 9 feet wide. So they start out small. And then you start building Yagis, you pack in a lot of gain. You're not going to do that on the HF bands unless you've got a big antenna and a good sized tower. Not only that, but power levels are not overly critical. 100 watts is really good on most of these bands. There's also a small number of competitors in these contests. For example, the CQ single sideband HF contest, it's 8,000 competitors, versus on the CQ VHF contest, roughly 1,000 competitors. Another thing, modulation modes don't matter. CW only or single sideband only just doesn't happen in VHF contests. It's get on the air and make contacts any way that you can. So what are these VHF contests? Well, there's really only 4 of them. The ARRL holds a contest January, June, and September. The CQ contest is in July. They're always Saturday afternoon to Sunday evening. The ARRL's is a little bit longer at 33 hours. The CQ contest is just 27 hours. And then there's also some VHF sprints. Those are held in the spring and the fall. They're just 4 hours and they're held by band. For example, the 2-meter sprint is held on a Monday evening, local time 7 o'clock to 11 p.m., and so on through the other bands. So what are the contest entry categories? And there's a lot of them in VHF contests. First, there's a single operator category. There's a low power category, and you see the power limits there. There's a high power category, anything that's higher than low power. There's also a 3-band, a single operator 3-band entry that covers just 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters with those power limits. A very attractive category because a lot of the rigs match up perfectly with those bands. There's also an FM only category, the low 4 bands at 100 watts. That's becoming increasingly popular in the contest. And then there's a portable category. Go out onto a hilltop or a mountaintop with your gear and you have a 10-watt limit there. There's also multi-operator categories, a limited multi-operator for 4 bands, and then the unlimited multi-operator. So that's multiple transmitters, multiple operators, usually at a superstation. Then there's the rover operations. There's classic rover, all bands, all power levels, 2 operators. There's a limited rover category. It's the 4 bands, the lower 4 bands at a 200 watt for 2 meters, 6 meters, 100 watts for 222 and 432. There's also the unlimited rover, all bands, high power, multiple operators. Finally, in the VHF contest, there's the exchange. That's a 4-digit grid, and the multipliers are the grids per band. You also get extra points for higher bands, 1 for 6 and 2, 2 for 222 and 432, and there's more for the higher bands. And January has a little bit different point allocation there as well. Good to read those rules. The ARRL contests also have some assistance rules. Frankly, they're very open. You can use online chat rooms, social media, texting, phone calls, APRS spotting for rovers. You can also self-spot on the DX clusters. The key channels, ping jockey is used for arranging meteor scatter contacts. VHF chat is another one on Slack that you can engage with. ON4KST works. You just cannot confirm the QSO or request repeats, but you can say, I'm transmitting on this frequency, I'm on this sequence, I'm continuing to transmit. So it's very, very open. And here on this slide, you can see one of those aids, which is really assistance. It's taking, this is DX maps, and it's taking the information from DX clusters. This one is on 6 meters, and it's showing here's the contacts that are happening. For me, I'm down in Texas. I'm saying, hey, I better point my antennas toward the Caribbean because that's where the majority of traffic is happening, but also to the East Coast, maybe north would work. So these are very, very helpful during the contest and even outside the contest. Now, the CQ VHF contest has different rules, different categories. So study up on these. The entry categories, there's a single operator all band, a single operator single band, which is one of the differences here. The CQ VHF contest only allows operation on 6 and 2 meters, and you can select only one of those for your competition. It also has single op all band QRP, which is 10 watts. It has a Hilltopper QRP operation. That's 6 hours only out of the 27 hours that are in this contest. Then there's a rover category and a multi-operator category. And then some of the differences here with the ARRL contest is the assistance is limited. You cannot use the phone, you can't text, there's no self-spotting. Now with meteor scatter and moon bounce, you can share frequency and sequence, but that's it. There's also no power categories. So if you're running at 100 watts and somebody else is running at 1,000 watts, they're your competitor. It doesn't matter in this contest outside of the QRP categories. And again, I'll emphasize this is a 6 and a 2 meter only contest. If you've only got 6 meters, this is a great one to try out. The exchange is roughly the same. It's a 4-digit grid. The multipliers are the grids per band. There's 1 point for 50 megahertz, 2 points for 144. And I'll add a personal story here. There's a big difference for the rovers as well that I just tumbled to this year. For ARRL, every grid that a rover activates is a multiplier. For the CQ Worldwide contest, it doesn't matter, but what does matter is every grid you go into, every multiplier you pick up in that grid is a new multiplier, adds to your multiplier total. Big difference, so read up on those rules. Okay, so what is an average station? Well, on 6 meters, an HF plus 6 meter rig, 100 watts, maybe a Moxon, which is a 2-element antenna, or a 3-element Yagi. Those work just great. For 2 meters, 50 watts is fantastic, and a Yagi at 50 feet is super fantastic. For 222 and 432, anything above 50 watts and a multi-element Yagi it works just great. Preamps are helpful at 6 and 2 meters, but they're essential on the higher bands. And here in this photo, you can see one of the versions of my station. I was running an L-Craft K3 for 6 meters and an ICOM IC910H for 2 meters as well as 432 meters. So, and those, the output from the K3, 100 watts. I did have a preamp on that. The output from the 910 is 100 watts on 2 meters, 75 watts on 432. And I had preamps on both of those and fairly simple antennas, which we'll touch on later. Well, what about those small antennas? You can see me standing in my front yard with a 3-element LFA Yagi for 6 meters. Try doing this with a 3-element 20-meter Yagi. This gives you an idea of the size and how easy it is to put these into a smaller yard. I put these actually into my side yard. The second picture there, it shows that 3-element Yagi and cheap Yagis with wood booms for 2 meters and 432. You can look up cheap Yagis on the web, and I think I've got that in one of the references here. But I've used those antennas from here in Dallas, Texas area to work into Florida with a tropospheric opening. They work, and they're very simple to put together and get up on the air. You can also use omnidirectional loops and omni-angles. I like Par Electronics Omni Angles. They're true omnidirectional antennas. One of my favorite antennas is a 6-meter stressed Moxon. It's small, it works great. It's two elements and works just fantastic. You'll see this later on one of my rover photographs. But I've used a painter pole or a push-up mast with just using my arm to rotate. It works just fine. The painter pole works great in a rover installation, and today at my home, I'm using a push-up mast strapped to my pool to get on the strapped to my pool fence to get on the air. So small antennas can work, and they're easy to get up in a small yard. So what about VHF propagation? Well, the big one is sporadic E. It's primarily on 6 meters, and during a contest, you pray for a sporadic E opening. That brings in contacts up to 1,500 miles away for single hop sporadic E, and double that for triple hop. And you can even work into Europe, to the Caribbean, and into northern South America and Central America. So it can be pretty spectacular during a contest. There's also tropospheric ducting, 2 meters and above. The key time to watch for this is on Sunday mornings, when the temperature is just right to bring about tropo ducting and get you some longer distance contacts. Meteor scatter is another popular one for VHF. It happens in the early mornings. That's when it works best. It actually happens all the time. It's just that the more intense openings are at sunrise local time. Then there's also moon bounce, or Earth, Moon, Earth, EME. That typically takes a bigger station and antennas, but those are possibilities for propagation during a contest. Well, let's talk a little bit about contest strategy. The first thing to focus on is to find a category that fits you. First priority, have some fun. The second is generate a reasonable score. So look over those categories. I mentioned earlier single operator 3-band is an interesting one. Find one that fits your station. Find one that fits the area of the country you're in, trying to find other contacts, and then generating a reasonable score. My own example is the reason that I migrated to a rover category is that in the first hour or two of a contest, I had worked everybody in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I was waiting for the rovers to come through to add a little excitement to my contest. Eventually, I figured out, why the heck don't I set up a rover and go out and be one of those people that add spice to the contest? So that's, it's a matter for what you want to do, what fits you. So find that category that fits you for fun, and sure, generate a score and show some competition. Another thing on strategy is add more bands. Now, I've heard people talking about, I want to add, I'm not sure I want to add a band just to listen to white noise. And if that's the case in your part of the country, don't do it. But it is a way to add more points and more activity to your contest. Then add modes. That will help you find more stations. Although, if, for example, the only caveat to that is if you're entering the FM only category. But I'll also mention, for modern day contesting, WSJT is an absolute must. So much has migrated to that mode. FT8, FT4 occasionally. We're hoping that more happens there on FT4, but FT8 is the big go-to place for sporadic E and for tropo contacts on 6, 2, 222, and 432, and I haven't gone higher than that myself. And then there's MSK 144 for meteor scatter contacts. JT65 is used for moon bounce, and soon we'll be learning all about Q65 and what impact that has on VHF contesting. I'll also mention that You can work more stations faster on single sideband or CW when the band's open, but those stations have to be there. So don't don't rule out single sideband or CW. The other absolute maxim for any kind of contesting is put your butt in the chair and be there to watch for other stations. I'll offer that my own experience for VHF contesting was that the band here at home had gone dead, like I mentioned. I wandered off to do some other things, and my wife reported to me she was shocked to hear somebody talking to her when she happened to wander through the ham shack. And I said, "What?" I ran back there, and sure enough, there was an e-skip opening. So, keep your butt in the chair for contesting. That's a universal rule. I'll also mention that nights can be very quiet, but I'll note that many stations, that's when they work meteor scatter. It can take 20, 30 minutes for a meteor scatter contact. Not the best for a contest, but at night when nobody else is on, it's a good way to put some multipliers into your log. Well, the big operating practice, other than keeping your behind in the chair, is that 2 meters is the go-to calling place. It was typically a single sideband calling frequency, 144.2, that you would call CQ, you'd find somebody and you'd go to the other bands. But it's the go-to calling place even today on FT8 and some of those other modes. If 6 meters is open, that's the place to be. You're going to work some grids that you wouldn't on 2 meters, so you want to be there if that one is open. And then wherever you're at, you want to try to move stations to other bands. That's where you can get more points, and so you want to try to do that. And accurately pointing your antenna, it's critical at VHF. They might be small, but they have a lot of gain, and that gain comes from a narrow bandwidth. So point your antenna on 2 meters, and as you work up your way through the bands, you're going to get to narrower beam widths, and so you want to be focused on that station. Another good operating practice is Sunday morning tropo and meteor scatter. They can add some multipliers, so you want to be on the air then, and that's when you can help your score. The photo shown here is my rover with a push-up mast. You can see the Moxon at the bottom, and then 2 lightweight Yagis, one for 432 and the top one for 2 meters. So gives you an idea of how small these antennas are and just how much a push-up mast can do for you as well. I'll leave you with this note. It's really just about getting on the air. Push the 6 meter button on your HF for the 6 meter rig and get on the air. I'll point out that you too can be a winner. I have a buddy that was doing a satellite contact a couple 100 miles from here on Mount Scott. I saw that he was doing satellite contacts. I reached out to him and I said, point your ARRL antenna in my direction and let's work. And by golly, I worked him on 2 meters and 432 meters. I think he might have worked a couple more people. And I said, be sure to enter the contest. So he submitted an entry and won his category in Oklahoma, QRP category. So you too can be a winner. Get on the air and make it happen. And I'd also say, don't let perfect get in the way of getting on the air and having fun. From time to time, I get email messages, hey, what if I do this or what if I do that? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. Why don't you try it out? It really is amateur radio. Try it out and see what happens. You don't need to get hung up in these things. My first rover activity, I had that painter pole. I had those 2 Yagis. I had an IC910. I was on just 2 bands. 2 meters and 432, and I had an absolute blast. And it said to me, I need to come back and try this again. And finally here in this other bullet point, I'll mention September 2020 single operator FM category. There were 27 entries in the entire US. The winner had 3,000 points. 24 of those entries, the scores were less than 1,000 points. and many ARRL sections went without entries. So get on the air and you can actually win some paper, and most importantly, you can have some fun. Here's a quick slide on where to go for more information. The Central States VHF Society has some good stuff. There's some email lists, VHF Contesting on Groups.io, the WSJTX Groups.io. There's also an ARRL contest update that you can subscribe to. The National Contest Journal. It has frequent VHF articles and a column, and I published 3 articles there last year. And QST and CQ magazines are good places to go as well. And finally, I'd recommend my own website, K5ND.radio or K5ND.net will get you there. And I've published a special post on VHF contesting with lots of links that could help you out as well. I'll leave you with one more warning that this could happen to you. Here I am repairing my antennas, this case the Moxon, that came in contact with some antenna-eating trees on one of my rovers operation. But this could happen to you. Now we'll turn it over to the Q&A session.